Thank you everyone for joining. Today, my colleague Bonnie and I will be discussing elder fraud and abuse. Here at RDC, it is our mission to prevent criminal infiltration of the world's financial systems. Our technology and screening capabilities allow for us to aid financial institutions in stopping crimes from human trafficking to terrorist financing. This slide here is to give everyone a glimpse into RDC's data, which will be used throughout the webinar. We have captured over 11 million profiles from adverse media in over 70 languages. By taking RDC's data and pulling it into our presentation, we will be able to show you how our content itself can drive what banks need to do and give financial institutions the insights to help them look out for more risk-relevant entities. This webinar will clarify the definition of elder fraud and abuse in the context of the global financial market, highlight where and why this problem is growing at an alarming rate, look at the global regulations surrounding elder fraud, and suggest measures financial institutions can take to both stop these financial criminals and protect their customers from financial loss. So, what is elder fraud? Elder fraud, in the context that we are going to be talking about today, is the exploitation of individuals over the age of 60, where the perpetrator has intent to harm that individual. Elder fraud and abuse can refer to both financial crimes and crimes of passion. However, we will be examining the financial crime aspect of elder fraud during today's presentation. The criminals that are perpetrating this financial exploitation are usually in a position of trust with the elderly individual. The criminal's ability to prey on the trust of the elderly makes populations over 60 more vulnerable populations. These trusted positions can include family members, legal counsels, and other close associates. Why is elder fraud relevant? Regulatory scrutiny has become much more prevalent as banks can fall liable for not having proper controls in place. Financial institutions have a legal obligation from regulators all around the world to implement policies that address elder fraud, such as employee training and third-party screenings. Data privacy laws have started to carve out populations of vulnerable people, including the elderly. This designates them as a group that is in need of extra protection, especially from a data privacy perspective. Failure to comply with these regulatory and privacy regulations can lead to reputational risk. This is a significant cause as the realm of social responsibility has become a major focus for large institutions. If a bank does business with these perpetrators, they put their reputations at risk by being involved with them. Furthermore, noncompliance leads to loss of revenue, fines, and loss of customers. Over the last 5 years, banks have reported an increase in more than 50% of elder fraud scams due to the regulatory scrutiny, meaning that regulators are enforcing these protective policies even more, and therefore banks are increasing the reporting of these incidents. In the United States alone, an estimated 5 billion elderly individuals are scammed each year, which comes out to about $36.5 billion lost in funds annually. What we found even more interesting is that for every one reported incident, 44 crimes of elder fraud go unreported or unaccounted for. This figure represents the percentage of elderly individuals that experience elder abuse. Now, if you think of the statistic from the last slide, that only 1 in 44 crimes are reported, you can conclude that this figure is actually much higher than 16%. Now that we have defined elder fraud and know that it is a rising trend, we can look at where and why these incidents are occurring. Elder fraud is a global crisis, and this has been recognized by both national and international legislations. The world map on the screen shows the comparison of the population density of elderly individuals in 2015 to the projection of it in 2050, where a dark red denotes the highest density. As you can see, the elderly population is significantly higher in 2050 than in 2015. However, elder fraud is not only determined by population. It also has to do with the lack of available information for the elderly. This includes the lack of access to technology, social media access, as well as access to the internet has given criminals an increased ability to take advantage of elderly individuals and scam them. As introduced in the beginning of the webinar, RDC has tracked and analyzed over 18 years of adverse media, which has led to a database with over 11 million bad actor profiles. One amazing capability we have with this wealth of data is the ability to identify important financial trends and analyze what that means for financial institutions and global markets. This can help them to efficiently allocate their resources. This figure shows the top 10 countries with the highest incidences of elder fraud. We are going to zoom into 3 countries as case studies: the United States, India, as they are the top 2 countries, and then Japan. While Japan is not on the list of the top 10 countries, it is notable to point out as it had the largest jump in elder fraud crimes since 2018 at 99%. India is the country with the second highest amount of reported elder fraud crimes as captured through RDC's adverse media, which may come as a surprise when you look at the population chart in the background. Younger people outnumber older people by a large factor. And I say large factor because India has a population of 104 million elders. Younger people outnumbering the elderly population is just one reason we see 60% of perpetrators being family members. As younger generations take both professional occupations and familial roles over from older generations, this leaves the elderly individuals with greater dependencies on their family members, especially economic dependence. Something else we want to point out is that India has a high rate of neglect as a form of financial abuse. Neglect is not something someone would normally associate with financial exploitation, but what we observed is a trend of close friends and relatives moving in with older individuals in order to take care of them, but in reality, end up trying to take over the elderly individual's property and assets. The next country we want to share some insights on is Japan. As previously mentioned, Japan had the largest increase in reported elder fraud incidences since 2018 at 99%. One of the biggest reasons for this jump can be seen in the population graph. Japan has proportionately more elders than in India, and this is one of the explanations for why we see caregiver and nursing home abuse to be the top reported elder fraud crime. Again, like neglect, one would think that nursing home abuse would fall under crimes of passion rather than a financial abuse. However, in Japan, we found that 44% of fraud was directly related to caregiver and nursing home abuse, proving it to be a form of financial exploitation. Now on to the United States. In 2035, the elderly population is going to outnumber children for the first time in US history. As elder populations rise, so does elder fraud. So this is just one of the many contenders for why we need to address elder fraud as soon as possible and stop it before even more people are affected. The rapidly aging population of the United States explains for it being the country with the highest elder fraud captures. As you can see by this figure, the elderly population in the United States is expected to reach over 90 million by the year 2050. While population is an extreme factor when it comes to tracking and trending elder fraud, it is not the only factor. The map figure shows the density of elderly individuals by US state, where darker blue denotes a higher elderly population. Not surprisingly, Florida is in the top 3 states for having a high proportion of elderly individuals. However, Texas is a lighter blue, meaning the population of elderly individuals is not as dense as expected. I say as expected because if you look at the bar graph, you can see the states with the highest reported elder fraud crimes. Again, it does not come as a surprise that Florida is in the top 3 states. But what is surprising is that Texas is the state with the highest reported elder fraud crimes, despite having a proportionately lower elderly population. So this is where we ask why. And here is another area where our adverse media insights and analysis come into play. We found that Texas has a program called the Texas Elder Justice Initiative, which states that all Texans have an obligation to report suspicions of elderly abuse or neglect. New legislation is one of the reasons Texas is the #1 state for reported elder fraud crimes. Screening against adverse media allows us to gather and track these insights as new legislations lead to higher media coverages. So we would actually expect to see Texas with a higher rate of elder fraud captures. As we've seen, using population statistics is not a sufficient way to analyze elder fraud, as there are other factors that play into this trend. So, by screening against adverse media, financial institutions can detect and prevent this global financial crime. Before we discuss how financial institutions should address this issue, we're going to explore one more case study to see how elder fraud relates to our current environment dealing with coronavirus. During times of an economic or political uncertainty and global disruptions, cybercrime and online fraud rise. As the trends of the Great Recession show, not only is cybercrime recession-proof, it thrives in a struggling economy. Our current volatile economy and worldwide upset is the perfect setup for those who take advantage of uncertainty. And right on time, the fraudsters are capitalizing on the global pandemic. Some of the reported elder fraud crimes associated specifically with coronavirus have been prepaid mail order sanitation scams, where the elderly person who is paying never actually receives their order. There are officials pretending to be from the government, offering tax refunds via phone and email, and phishing emails from legitimate-looking sources such as the World Health Organization. One specific example involves fake coronavirus maps being sent around that, once clicked on, downloads a virus to the user's computer. Reports of this scam came out and warned users to beware and only click on a link if it was under a certain domain name. As previously mentioned in this webinar, lack of knowledge around technology makes elderly individuals more vulnerable. So while warnings like the one for the fraudulent map are helpful, they may not reach all audiences. Excuse me. Now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Bonnie to discuss some of the other crimes associated with elder fraud.
Thanks so much, Colleen. And so following on to what you covered, fraud really can take many forms, and based on our adverse media and other publicly available information, these statistics were derived from RDC's database. They show the range of crimes that can intersect with fraud, including theft, abuse, murder, assault, and bribery, just to name a few, all of which may be perpetrated against the elderly in addition to financial fraud or be part of the same scheme. Here's a really good example from our database of the case where a team of individuals targeted 10 elderly victims across the US with the intent to scare them into sending cash to save a family member, using tactics that include playing on their emotions and insisting on immediacy, so that they have no time to consult family or friends, but are really forced to send that money if they want to save a loved one. This is a very common type scam. I'm sure everyone listening to this knows someone in their family or close friends that have been a victim of a scam like this or one similar. In fact, the top 10 most reported scams include IRS impersonations, robocalls, sweepstakes, computer tech support scams, financial things having to do potentially with the IRS, grandparent scams, romance scams, social security scams, impending lawsuits, and identity theft. And as Colleen has just mentioned with the coronavirus, every new type of event that's happening in the world is potentially something that a perpetrator can use to their advantage in order to trick somebody who's aging and may be scared. Over the last 5 years, these types of scams and financial crimes perpetrated against the elderly have increased year over year, amounting to a very big 153% increase over that time span. And as Colleen pointed out, we expect this trend to continue and that criminals will be smarter and even more savvy, looking for ways to exploit the vulnerabilities of the elderly. As the number of reported financial scams increases and the technology becomes more sophisticated, it's no surprise that the financial services is the leading industry for fraud. And in addition to regulatory and data privacy pressures to protect vulnerable groups, banks need to protect their largest group of customers. Something that we didn't know going into this, but was very interesting to find out, is seniors make up 70% of all deposits as the population ages. These statistics are not likely to change. And in fact, that group of depositors may actually increase in size as the population ages, making it important for banks to be proactive in protecting this group of customers. Another barometer of the increase in elder fraud is the year-over-year rise in the number of suspicious activity reports relating to elder fraud. Not only can the rise in suspicious activity reports be attributed to an increase in fraud activity, but also the regulatory pressures to report any suspicious activities that the banks are seeing coming from regulatory authorities. It's important that the banks and other financial institutions are rigorous in their filing these reports, as law enforcement uses these to help open investigations and helps them target perpetrators. Here we have a timeline how different regulatory agents and organizations are working to help protect the elderly. I wanted to highlight two in particular. One, which is the FINRA Rule 2165, which permits financial institutions to place temporary holds on disbursements of funds from the accounts of customers where there is a reasonable belief of that there is financial exploitation of these customers going on. The second is an amendment to FINRA Rule 5412. And this requires financial institutions to make a reasonable effort to obtain the name of a contact for information, and it's called the trusted contact. This is very important because it allows the financial institution to contact somebody if they think that there is fraud being perpetrated on an elderly individual. So what can banks do? There are at least 6 major areas where banks can focus their due diligence efforts to be proactive to protect their customers and mitigate any regulatory or reputational risk. These include technology, using AI and other sophisticated tech tools to analyze account behavior and raise flags if there are warning signs, such as large sums of money are suddenly being withdrawn or other odd financial behavior that they have not seen in the account prior to this. Screening against adverse media, wanted lists, and data that can help identify the bad actors before they even get into the system. Reporting all suspicious activity to the authorities. Local law enforcement must rely on these suspicious activity reports, but also interaction with the community is also incredibly important. So local law enforcement as well as community outreach are both very important and work best together. Educating the seniors and their families how to protect themselves and protect their grandmother or their grandfather is also extremely important and helps people become much more aware of the fraud that could be perpetrated on them or a loved one. And being aware of the regulatory guidance that will assist not only with due diligence, but protect their customers. And those being the examples I had just discussed, which was the trusted contact and the ability to hold on accounts where they see something is very suspicious. But let's not forget one of the most important ones is really training staff to look for red flags, not just account behavior, but a face-to-face interaction that seems odd. And red flags could really be anything from insufficient funds, unpaid bills, unusual movement of money between accounts, cashing out accounts without regard for penalty, new powers of attorney, a stranger or caregiver helping conduct transactions. These are all some of the red flags that can be looked out for, both through automated ways, but also from a very local, personal, one-to-one interaction and really getting to know your customers. The result is, and kind of bringing this back to the more human side, is any amount that an elderly loses can be devastating. Losses can leave the elderly completely destitute. So what have we learned? There are ways to mitigate regulatory risk by implementing internal procedures and policies, developing and following regulatory and data privacy guidelines, and developing robust technology monitoring and screening. In addition to these steps, a financial institution can also include social responsibility programs to embrace collaboration at the local level with law enforcement and community outreach, all of which will have a very positive impact on their company's reputation. And if we all work to bring this together, we can all make a difference. So thank you all very much for your time. And if you have any questions or feedback, please send those to info@rdc.com.